Welcome to the Thriving Christian Artist, the podcast where we hope you connect with God to bust through the roadblocks that have held you back for years, create the work you love, and really live the life you know God created you to live as an artist in His kingdom. I'm Matt Thomas, your host. Let's get started. Well, hey everybody, welcome to the podcast again. I'm Matt Thomas, your host, and I am so stinking excited. I've got two of my favorite people in the world here with me, Lonnie and Margie Johnson from down in the Greenville, South Carolina area. Guys, how are y'all doing today?
Doing great. Yeah.
Awesome. These folks are some of the most incredibly talented ceramic artists that you will ever see. And I can also say now, from what it's been about a month now, brand new members of the Southern Highland Craft Guild. So
Yes.
I know that's a big thing. So
It is.
Awesome. You know, I know both of you have stories of your artistry and that sort of thing, you know, probably separately. But the thing I wanted to talk about today is really how you guys do this together, because there are not many husband and wife teams out there that flow as beautifully as you guys do in what you do creatively. And I know you probably both kind of come at it from two different ways and it all kind of meets in the middle. But I wanted to just talk a little bit about that with you guys. And Margie, I want to start with you because we've known each other the longest.
Yes.
And then this guy, Lonnie, came on in the picture. And
Yes, you did.
and that's been incredible. But I know for you, you know, to say, gosh, okay, you're a ceramicist and incredibly talented. But when I met you, you were a painter and you still do. So what's that transition been like from you going from painting into ceramics?
It's been really good. I've always wanted to piddle. It's a good Southern word. Piddle in ceramics, and I think it was even before Lonnie and I met. I mean, all I did was painting and drawing, and I took a workshop. Actually, I met a ceramicist, Sarah Wells Rowland, at an event in Asheville, and got to talking with her and got super excited about the possibility of doing ceramics and took one of their workshops, and I was hooked.
Now, did you know when you took that? I know for some people when they touch a new medium or they go in there, there's like this, when you touch the clay for the first time, was that?
It was. It's very surreal. It's a very almost a spiritual a thing, just touching the clay and feeling the earth and throwing on the wheels where I really started, and feeling that wet clay between your fingers. I mean, it was a lot like when I was a kid and playing with mud pies. I loved to play with mud pies. So it was a fun experience. It was good.
Now, did you grow up doing other kinds of art other than painting, or
No, in fact, I didn't even start doing art at all until I was in my 30s. Always wanted, I couldn't think of anything more incredible growing up than to be an artist. If you were an artist, you had made it in life. And so, and I didn't have the self-esteem to do anything. I thought, I can't do that. And so I was in my 30s before I ever did anything. I went back to school to get my graphic design degree and had to take some art classes and discovered that I really could paint and draw. So, and it was just, went on from there.
Now, Lonnie, I know you also got that technical graphic design, marketing-y kind of background. How did you come into this whole wanting to do art, and especially the ceramics part of it? Because I know you've had kind of a evolution as well.
I have, yeah. I mean, art really started for me in high school. I took one class and really fell in love with it because I would doodle and draw and, just sketch. And, when I was distracted, I would sit with a pad of paper in church and doodle instead of paying attention. But I, especially in school, I did all my notes were in colors and stuff, but
we've all been guilty of it. So,
yeah. But I really I started enjoying the thought of doing art after I graduated from high school. I was trying to figure out what I was going to do, and I thought, I'd like to be an artist. And so at the time, I spent a semester up in Atlanta at the Atlanta College of Art, and it really opened my eyes to a lot of potential, and I started seeing things differently. And I think really that was prior to then. I didn't really understand or hadn't really experienced the awe of moments of beauty, of seeing things that really just made you pause in your mind and your spirit. And Actually, I left Atlanta because I thought, this spiritual side of this thing, I really need to explore it. And I thought maybe I would go somewhere and be a pastor. So I went to Bible college.
Wow.
Which was a bit of a deviation from the creative path. But,
you could say so, right?
So I ended up getting my, a long story to get my, got an associate in biblical studies. But then I went back to the art side of things. Because I really realized that there was something about that really drew me. I was working with Youth for Christ at the time. That's when I really started exploring graphic design, because I was working on some publications that we were doing, just doing desktop publishing type work. I became really excited about some software and started self-educating. And for me, that was really the beginning of becoming a graphic designer, was the joy of learning, of experiencing, finding balance in composition, and paying attention to what's being done by other people that you really appreciate their work, and learning the trade, if you will. So that was kind of the beginning for me of the whole path of becoming a designer.
Now, when you were back in Bible college, did you have any sort of upfront kind of knowledge of, wow, I'm wired like an artist, and maybe there's going to be a spiritual connection here? Or were those two things still very separate for you?
They were pretty separate, really.
Yeah. That's true for most people, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I had people giving me advice at the time, was kind of like, one person was telling me, hey, go ahead and get your art degree, because if you decide to be a pastor and it doesn't work out so well, or you need to self-support for a while, be a tent maker,
get a real job, right?
Have a career opportunity, and then other people were advising that, no, just go for it. If God's going to provide for you, then, you just got to trust him. I ended up landing somewhere in the middle of realizing that God can use the creative to provide, which was not necessarily the way people thought, and the advisors that I had in my life at the time.
Sure. So was that something in you were kind of like, doggone it, I'm going to do this? Or did you have some, things to work through? I know, Margie, you said there were some self-esteem issues there of even, allowing yourself to think that you could be an artist. So maybe for both of y'all, how did you work through those issues?
Well, for me, I think a lot of that was, sometimes God just does things, and he aligns things for you in your life. And I had self-educated, and I was looking for a career path on all this design software. I really knew CorelDRAW was my software choice at the time, and the sign industry was pretty busy with that. So I ended up getting a job at a sign company because I could demonstrate skill. But ironically enough, when I first started there, the foreman put me out on the floor doing vinyl graphics, just basically assembling signs, doing the physical portion of it, not the design part of it. And it was several months I was on the job and never having sat at the computer, even though that's what I was hired to do. And it wasn't until kind of like I got a break there, because I was in the computer room and one of the guys was telling the foreman this couldn't be done in a reasonable amount of time. And I happened to pipe up and say, why don't you use that tool right there? You'll have it done in 30 seconds. And the foreman was like, this program? I said, yeah, that's what you hired me to do.
Remember?
But it was that kind of, showed me there that it didn't matter what element I was doing in terms of the whole process of creation. I learned a whole lot doing stuff on the floor, actually doing the physical work of creation with my hands. I learned to love it a lot. But then I got the chance, and that really gave me the chance to actually become a designer, a creator, rather than just a production worker, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, because you can talk about it all day long, but you got to do it, right?
Yeah, I got to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Margie, what about you?
I think for me, well, after when I went back to school in my 30s and I got my graphic design degree, and I did that for many years. And then I went through a time where I lost my job twice in a row due to one company closing and then the other company downsizing. And also during this time, all of my friends had gotten married. And so it was a very tough time for me. I wasn't doing graphic design anymore. I had no creative, outlet. And what really happened was, I was on the computer, I was on Facebook one day, and somehow I came across your book study, the first book, Unlocking the Heart of the Artist. Came across it on Facebook somehow, and I said, I'm going to that. It was the first night of your book study, I think, or maybe the second. And I said, I'm going to that. And I don't do things by myself back then. I didn't do things by myself back then. And I hopped in my car and I drove to Asheville. I called my mom. I said, this is what I'm doing. Just so somebody knows where I'm at, because I'm going to a strange place and I don't know what's going to happen.
And I remember telling Tanya that night, because we were all so amazed. This was in the early days of doing any of this. And I was like, because we're like, what, an hour and a half away from each other. Yeah. And I remember telling Tanya, oh my gosh, somebody drove all the way from Greenville to come up the mountain, for this. It's really made the hunger, in their heart. But
it was. And, I met everybody that was there, and it was like life birthed in me. And I drove down the mountain. I called a friend of mine and I said, I have found my people. And it was like my life was completely transformed from that one visit. Because I knew that from meeting everybody else, just something birthed in me. And I knew that life was going to be different from that point on. I'm an artist. In fact, from that moment, I was never able to call myself an artist until that night.
Wow. And I've been just privileged, as we've been friends over the years, to see not only your maturity and growth, but then this acceleration with you two as y'all met and got married and then started doing what you're doing now, which for those of you that don't know, you can click on the link here in the podcast. They do these incredible ceramic sculptures, magnolias and branches. And oh my gosh, it's just really, really fabulous. And in fact, if I wasn't doing what I'm doing now, I'm like, oh my gosh, I love what you guys do. And I think the funny thing is, and I've said this to you before, it's rare that anybody on their creative journey just nail it, as they're starting out. And I told you guys when I first saw them, I'm like, don't change anything. This is incredible. This is great. Talk about how you got into what you're doing, because, fast forward now from the, self-esteem and am I an artist or not? Now you guys are really starting to thrive, selling your work in multiple galleries all over the region. You just got into the Southern Highland Craft Guild, got your first big show this summer, which is going to be exciting. And how did you even have the idea? How did that kind of birth to do these magnolia sculptures and the things you're doing now?
Well, during one of the times that I was unemployed, I decided to go back to school, and I was going to Converse College just part-time in Spartanburg. And I took one of their ceramic courses. And one of the projects was a hand building class. And one of the projects was to make a lidded vessel. And I put a magnolia on top. It was big and bulky and ugly. And looking back now, I was so proud of it back then. And in fact, I wound up making two. And the instructor told me, he said, you've got something going there. You need to keep working on the flower, the magnolia. Working on it and try to perfect it. And it was, I don't know if we had met by then or it was just after that. Just after that we met. And so Lonnie started getting involved and learning ceramics. I started teaching him, and he was taking classes himself eventually. Mm-hmm. And just the collaboration between the two. Lonnie's got a great eye for detail. And so he saw, I don't know if I was the first one to put it on a log. I think I was, but it was still very basic and simple. And Lonnie has the eye for detail to put the knots on the logs. And, it was just,
it becomes synergistic is really what it is. I mean, that's the thing that, has been really exciting to me about the process because, I mean, I hadn't played with clay at all prior to, I did a little something in college with, a couple of projects, but I mean, you know, I never fired it. And so, it broke and died, but, because I didn't know anything about it. I just experimented with it. But whenever Margie first taught me how to throw, I got my first throwing lesson from her.
Yeah.
And there was something exciting about the feel of the clay and the process of moving the clay. And I mean, we talk about it. You definitely, when you get a chance to play with clay in that sort of situation, you understand why it's a biblical example of the way in us. So I mean, for both of us, I mean, there's this process of creativity and creation, of making things, of talking about it, of designing new ideas, of talking through ideas, coming up with new concepts, there's something amazing that happens when two people can dream with one another and be open and vulnerable about sharing your ideas, and you build off of it one another. So,
do you ever look at each other and go, "Not so much, honey," or
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. Because I think you got to have that vulnerability, right, to be able to say, not that, but this. I have a friend that she always says, "I love it when you don't do that." And I'm like, I love that. But I'm sure as a team, you got to have that kind of, openness and honest communication, especially, you guys are not just doing it as a hobby now. This is a big part of your living now. So,
yeah. Well, and it's not, I mean, we're always having conversations like, if I'm working during the day and he's at his job, then I'm sending pictures. What about this? What do you think about this? And, and then we'll talk about it again that night. And, but we're always having conversations, just bouncing off of each other. I'll have an idea and he'll come back with another idea, and it's almost like we feed off of each other.
Yeah. Now you guys are, balancing the whole work, life, love schedule of being married and having a family and all that. Lonnie, you're working, I hate to say a normal job, but you're working the normal job. Margie, you're in the studio all the time. Yeah. How does that work? What's that dynamic like for you guys? Because I know you said you're kind of collaborating through the day as it's available, but do both of you guys do both parts of the process, or Lonnie, you do one part, Margie does the other, or how does that look?
We tend to trade off. A lot of times, the bigger pieces that take longer drying time, like logs and stuff, Margie will form a lot of that during the day. And I'll help with doing leaves and petals and getting things together. Sometimes I'll do some of the assembly on that as well. But because of the process of the creation and how things have to dry and set up and prep, usually the bigger, thicker pieces, she'll get those prepped and ready. But even with that, we'll talk about those things. And obviously having another job makes it challenging to have the energy to get to the studio as much as I want to get there. Weekends, we try to make sure we have time to get there together so that we can work on things that we want to dream about together or try new ideas. But yeah, it is a process of trying to both of us, each of us can do all of it, but it's just a question of which one is available at the time that we're doing that part of the process.
But even so too, like I was working on a log the other day and I did it a little bit different. And so I snapped a picture before it was, while it was still wet, sent it to Lonnie. He sends information back. You might want to try, it looks a little awkward at this point. Try doing something different. So, we're always doing that.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And see, I love this because, this is real life for all the artists that are out there listening. You may be on what I call the bridge, from, working a full-time or part-time job and wanting to be a full-time artist. But as you guys can speak to, that's not an overnight process, right? I mean, there's Margie, I remember, when you had a full-time job and then you started doing this a little bit and then y'all took the plunge as a couple. What was that like, scary as all get out? Or was it just like, man, we know we're going to do this. We got total faith?
It wasn't scary for me. I was so excited.
You're like, I'm out of here, right?
It was a dream come true for me.
Mm-hmm.
And Lonnie is so supportive of our dreams, but he's supportive of my dreams.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's been good.
We both had a real peace about it. We just knew that it was God's timing, and then that's what He really wanted us to do. And there were, I mean, it's that He makes these opportunities that just are clearly Him doing something and leading us in a direction. He does that to us creatively. He does that to us in the path forward with what we're doing with the studio. So
it's learning to listen, right? I mean, it's just learning to hear His voice. And y'all know this about my story, but for those of you that don't, I mean, when I moved to Asheville in 2009, I was working as a full-time worship pastor and all that. My first book, Unlocking, had just come out, and it was about a year and a half before my pastor came to me and was like, Matt, we love you. We're not kicking you out, but it's obvious what God's doing. And I went part-time, and I remember there was that big sucking sound inside, like, oh, can I do this? Oh, is it really? Yeah. And then about a year later, he came to me again after we did our first big gathering of artisans over in Scotland. And he's like, bro, we love you, but I think it's time. And I'm like, oh, no. But I remembered, Tanya was such a huge, and is still a huge encouragement in all of that, because, things that may be really shaky or nervous for one spouse, for the other one, they've got total faith for it, or they've got clarity on that the other one may not have. And I think you guys are just such a beautiful example of not only creatively, but in your life, learning to not only listen to the Lord, but listen to each other, in that process. So talk a little bit about, your spiritual relationship with your work. I know for some people that's a very overt process. Some people talk about the prophetic art process of, man, God showed me this, I made this. It's a very clear connection. Others, I think I fall into this other category is, I'm always inviting the Holy Spirit into the process. But if He does anything through my work, it's more of a mystery to me than it is, anything overt. And I love that. I love the mystery of somebody coming up to the work and seeing something or sensing something that I didn't see. But what's your spiritual connection like with your work, and how is that developing?
For me, well, I mean, mine's kind of two-part. I do painting at church as basically a ministry to my church. I paint on worship nights, Sunday mornings, and those paintings are auctioned off. So that's, I'm I always pray about what the Lord wants me to paint. Sometimes He shows me, sometimes He doesn't. Sometimes it's just, I just paint what I enjoy. And it seems to be, people love it. I've had people come up to me when, I've just painted a kiwi, a piece of, a kiwi fruit. And someone just ministered to me so much. I was like, well,
that's your new ministry, the prophetic kiwi ministry. So.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But the other part of it too is just being in the studio and working on ceramics and stuff. I don't keep worship music on, but I play worship music when I'm painting, or, when I'm doing ceramics, and I'm always asking the Lord, the Holy Spirit, to, show me how to do this better. Or when I'm up against, doing something that is just not working right, show me what I need to do to make it better.
Isn't that great too? Because I'm like, I had that experience not too long ago. I had an idea for a basket, and I'm like, I cannot figure out how to get this to do. Mm-hmm. And the Lord gave me a dream that night.
Yeah.
And I saw exactly how to do it. I came in the next morning, and guess what? Ta-da! It worked. And I'm like, thank you, Jesus. He loves kudzu. I mean, so I guess He loves ceramics too. So
He does.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
That's awesome. Lonnie, what about for you?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of that's like what you just talked about. I mean, that whole spending time with God, and particularly for me in the morning, I try to get up early and spend a little bit of just before I start the day time. And a lot of times I find during that process that I'm able to talk with God about creative problems that I'm experiencing. My day job is also a creative job. I do graphic design and marketing. So, my brain is always engaged with how do I solve these design and creative problems, and that dialogue with Holy Spirit about just asking him, how do I solve this problem? How do I come up with a solution that meets the requirement? And that applies to the things that I'm working on at work, but it also applies to things that I'm working on in the studio. And like Margie said, I mean, we both, when we're there, we tend to keep some sort of music playing that's inspirational, that's encouraging. I think we both really love it when we find those times where we're worshiping in our creation process, if that makes sense. You're singing over it, and you just know that God's doing something in you and through you. But it isn't always like that. Sometimes you're just going through the process of what you know and what you're learning to do, and you're practicing your skill, and you're improving, and you try something that doesn't work, and you got to start that, got to get a new lump of clay because that one didn't work.
Yeah, I mean, it's not always an open heaven, right? Just this like glory realm. I mean, I wish it was, but I think all of us have, especially when you're working in the studio on a regular basis. I mean, I'm in here 8 o'clock to 4 o'clock pretty much 5 days a week, and it's like, there are some times where I don't want to make another basket, or I'm tired of people coming in here saying, I'm glad somebody finally found something to do with kudzu. I mean, the spirit of slap sometimes wants to come on me, and I don't want to, I'm not in the holy place, at that point. But I think that's the beauty of, I was watching something last night on the Ragamuffin Gospel and Brenton Manning, and he talked about, God doesn't love who we're supposed to be. He loves who we are. In all your weakness and all your roughness and all your whatever. So talk a little bit about, you guys too are right in the thick of building your business, building the engine that is taking, your work to the marketplace. And I know that's not just good marketing techniques and good ideas, but you're also really reliant on the Holy Spirit's leadership in that. So talk a little bit about that. I mean, what's that process been like, going from, not selling to your work to now being in multiple galleries and doing some shows, and what's that been like, and how is he leading you in that?
I think first you just have to come to a place of peace and knowing who's in control. And you're gonna have setbacks. You're going to have, mountaintops, peaks, and you're going to have valleys. And it's coming to a place and knowing those valleys is just a valley. It's not a resting place. And that was, a little hard at first, because you'd have a disappointment. Our flowers are fragile. So at first we had to overcome, some things. And it's knowing that that's not where God has us. It's just a part of the process.
Yeah, I was just this morning praying, and because I'm in kind of a stretching season right now, and the Lord was showing me that verse in Isaiah 54 about, enlarge the place of your tent, stretch out your tent stakes. And it's like stretching and expansion always happens before birth, right? But it's in that moment that you're like, I don't know if I can do this, but I know that I have to go through this in order for the birth to happen. And for a business, there's always those things of, gosh, that was really hard. The way I had to deal with this client, or lose that piece, or get turned down for a show, or have to refund somebody, or, whatever. But gosh, you got to go through that stuff, right?
You do. And I can't tell you how many times I've quit. Called Lonnie up. I quit. I'm not doing this anymore.
We are done.
And done. But the next day it's almost like Papa just gives you a surprise the next day. Mm-hmm. That it's, that wasn't.
Next day we would call from one of the galleries saying something sold.
Yeah.
You're like, maybe I shouldn't quit yet.
We sold another one. We can keep on. You can keep going. So that's so awesome. As you look at your journey, these several years that y'all have been walking this as a married couple and now growing a beautiful business and seeing it prosper, is there one thing or a couple of things that you say, gosh, this practice, this habit, this thing that we're doing is really paying off, has really been fruitful in our life to help us not only stay connected with the Lord, but really thrive as the artists we know God's called us to be?
That I don't know if this is what you're looking for, but our heart is not just for making ceramics and sending them out to customers. It's for others, for artists, for like-minded people. And I was telling, when we were talking, Lonnie and I were talking earlier, I'm an encourager. I love to encourage people. I hate to see someone not walking in what they're called to walk in. Someone who has a gift and doesn't use it. That hurts. My heart hurts for them because I know how much life has come with us walking in what we're called to walk in. And that's one thing that I try very hard to do. And I think it's become a habit, is encouraging people when I meet them, that, other artists, encouraging them to use the gift that God's given them and to walk, use that gift, not just in their own little room at home, but to use that gift to bless others.
And I'm sure that encourages you too. I mean, because
it does.
Yeah. Because anytime you can, I know with myself, if I'm feeling down or whatever, it's like the Lord will almost bring in a divine appointment of somebody that I can speak faith into. And before the end of it, I'm like, I'm blessing myself. I mean, it's that thing of, stirring yourself up in the Lord, right? Yeah. Encouraging yourself. Why so downcast? Oh, my soul, put your hope in God. And it's, I think when we remember what God has done in our life, that is a habit that it spills out onto other people, and it keeps us motivated as well. Lonnie, what about you?
I mean, Margie and I have both really been discovering that truth. I think, for me, just a lot of that has been, like I mentioned, just some morning time. It's been a habit that's really started to blossom more for me. But it's interesting because out of that and out of the synergy of what we do in the studio together and out of our, our worship together at our church, we've both really begun to have a real revelation for the innate creativity that God has deposited into everybody, and we both practice that habit a lot of having the conversations with people and drawing out of them the awareness or recognition that there is something of God that has been deposited into them that He wants to nurture. Mm-hmm. And I can't tell you how many conversations I've had at our First Friday or Open Studios or whatever. People come in, they'll tell me, "Oh, I'm not creative at all," and we'll keep having that conversation, and pretty soon that well, I do write, and I have stories that are in me, and it's like but the people just are not. So many people are not aware of what has been deposited in them and the creativity that comes from the Holy Spirit and how He wants to burst something in them. He's put it in them. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we both have, I think, as far as habits go, I mean, that's a habit that we both we're seeing that more and more, and it's growing in us. Mm-hmm. And it changes how we approach our work. It changes how we approach ourselves. I mean, like Margie had said, she didn't call herself an artist until she met you and the whole group in Asheville and had that, God really birthed that in her. I didn't call myself an artist for years. It's really been recently that I realized that I'm not just a graphic designer, a technical person, that I'm an artist, and that's something that's within me. And I think that's been something that we're both really growing in, is being intentional and even just spontaneous about finding opportunities to nurture that in other people, because it does encourage us, inspires us too.
There are hundreds, if not thousands, of people that will be listening to this podcast, and they may be in exactly the same place that you were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I think of that old phrase, broke, busted, disgusted, feel like, I can't do this anymore. Am I a real artist? All the baggage, all the stuff that you guys have walked through and out of. And what would you say to those artists, and even the artist that's maybe come through some of that, but's trying to build a business and just not seeing the fruit happen yet? How would you encourage them?
I would say keep at it. It's a process.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something that, and if it happens overnight, that's fantastic, but it doesn't usually just happen overnight. But it's a process, to get to where you want to go. But even when you think you've gotten to where you want to go, there's still more.
Yeah.
And also celebrate the little successes, because those all build up to big successes. And
yeah, that's good. I mean, absolutely. If you don't stick with it, don't give up. And I think that, just like what I was saying earlier, I think that one of the big encouragements I would give them is that God constantly wants to show you Himself in the things that He's created. We read that in Scripture that He reveals Himself through His creation. And He wants to do that in you. And I think that as anybody who's starting to explore whatever media or way that they would choose to create, I would encourage them to aim for the things that reflect the character of God, because our society likes to go for what I call the low-hanging fruit. It's easy to inspire feelings of loss or shame or hurt or pain. It's an entirely different revelation to find joy and beauty. Those are things that are birthed from a revelation of God. And for me, just in starting to see more and more how God displays Himself in other people, in their creative works, in one another, and what we're doing, and in our creative works. I think that I would encourage people to look for that, and to really, when you have eyes and you start seeing, it stirs something in you. So that'd be my.
Let me say too, that it's never too late.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up, I wish, looking back, that I would have started as a young child doing art. I wish I'd had the self-esteem, but it wasn't until, it really wasn't until my mid-40s that I actually started doing art seriously. And I'm living the dream now. I am. And it's never too late to start doing what you love to do and what God's called you to do.
Yeah.
You guys are such an encouragement, and it's just such a testimony to what God can do and in our life, as not only as artists, but just as people, and to bring you together, two people that love each other and called in the same way and growing together. It's just really, really inspiring. I know there are a ton of people that are like, I want to know these people. I want to connect with them. How can they connect with you on the web, Instagram, Facebook, that sort of thing? And of course, we'll put links right down here in the podcast as well. But
Facebook's probably the best way. Our Creative Adventures is the name of our studio. We do have a website. It's just a static page right now, so it's not a shopping cart. But so you can hit us there. And we're just starting our Instagram page, so it's birthing. We're going through the process of starting to build a little bit there, but Facebook's really been what we've been putting stuff out on. It's where we talk and communicate with people the most. So
awesome.
Catch us there. That's the easiest way.
Well, great. Well, guys, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. And folks, as you're listening to this, if you want to connect with Margie and Lonnie, please do that. Encourage them. Go find their work, buy it, and you'll love it. And just be encouraged. And also, just as a reminder, anybody that's coming to Gathering of Artisans this year, you guys have got a workshop there. It may already be full, I'm not sure, but they could definitely meet you and hang out and that sort of thing, and get the mojo, right? So they can.
That's good.
That's good.
Well, awesome. Well, hey, guys, thanks so much for being on today. Hey, thanks so much for spending a few minutes with me today on the podcast. Listen, I hope it's been a huge encouragement to you on your journey as an artist. Hey, also, before you leave, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of the other episodes of the Thriving Christian Artist podcast. And also, be sure to connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, or at my website, which is matttommymentoring.com. Until next time, remember, you were created to thrive. Bye-bye.